English translation, 532nd contact, Saturday, the 24th of December 2011, 16 o'clock hours.
Salome, Ptaah, I was still busy with other corrections than the ones we did with Bernadette. Look here. This folder contains the whole thing, which I have to correct again because something is not right. But I will do that in the evening.
You are also welcome again, Edward. As I have seen here, you have written down some questions on these little papers, which I will be happy to answer.
Exactly, the little papers are called notes or memos. So I can ask you right away?
Yes.
Good, it says Marlowe. And then the question of how this man is in relation to what you said on the 19th of November, about this man who, like Edward of Vere, also wrote for Shakespeare. How much did Shakespeare himself write, and why did the other two even write works for him? It also raises the question of who wrote Hamlet and who wrote Romeo and Juliet. Were they really written by Shakespeare himself?
Hamlet and Romeo and Juliet were not written by William Shakespeare, but by Christopher Marlowe, as were various other works, although the 17th Earl of Oxford. Edward of Vere also wrote various works for Shakespeare, who himself was not so good at writing in the manner attributed to him that he could have written the works attributed to him today. From his own writing came only very trivial and insignificant things, which he also did not bring to the public, and so all the 38 known dramas, comedies, poems, and histories attributed to him came from the pen of Edward of Vere and Christopher Marlowe. Both used Shakespeare during 1589 to 1613 only as a makeshift to publish their works. Edward of Vere was not so good, but Christopher Marlowe was a very good poet and playwright. Both of them, however, had profound reasons to use Shakespeare as a makeshift, especially Marlowe.
I am sorry. By makeshift you mean straw man? That Shakespeare gave his name to the works written by Edward of Vere and Christopher Marlowe, so he used them all under his own name, and also took credit and honor for them. But what I do not understand is that they were both ghostwriters for Shakespeare.
Edward of Vere was, as I said, not a particularly good poet and playwright, so he used Shakespeare for some of his works, so that he would not have to appear himself because he feared bad criticism. Christopher Marlowe, on the other hand, had to flee because he put his life in danger with regard to his faith. So, in the spring of 1593, he arranged a well-considered brawl with friends in which he was allegedly stabbed to death, which allowed him to escape unrecognized. The truth is that he fled and went to Italy, where he could live under a different name and without the danger of persecution. It was there that he wrote most of the works he had sent to Shakespeare until 1613, who then used them under his name. However, he was not allowed to do so under his own name, nor was he allowed to do so under his false name, because otherwise he would have been recognized, persecuted, and handed over to the courts. Christopher Marlowe himself died at the age of 50 on the 28th of May, 1614, so that Shakespeare naturally did not receive any more works from him during the last 2 years of his life, and nothing else became known under his name.
Thank you. This note says Globster on it. These are sea-washed and barely decomposable, very large and several meters in size sea-dweller carcasses, whose skin and interior is neither fish nor meat. I have not yet seen such a thing myself. But globsters are large, boneless, and hard rubber-like carcasses that have been washed up on the beach in different parts of the sea, such as the monster of St. Augustine in Tasmania. Such globsters, as the rubber-like masses are called, as was reported on television, were washed up as early as 1896, but also in 1960, 1988, and 1997, although it has not yet been possible to find out what these carcasses, which weigh up to about 10 tons, are. Do you know anything about this?
You have been with Quetzal on various deep-sea voyages in the Atlantic and Pacific, and you have seen very large manta-like sea creatures, and these are exactly the carcasses of such sea creatures.
Aha, I remember those creatures. They really looked like giant manta rays, and Quetzal explained that they can grow up to 10 meters tall and also weigh up to about 10 tons. The skin and inner layer of these sea creatures, Quetzal said, is very tough and hardly decomposable, so that after their death the carcasses survive for months and are also difficult to cut. He compared this with the giant octopods I have seen, which are also said to be tough. The biggest guy of this species I could see was easily 20 meters tall with his tentacles stretched out and covered with suction cups. At least that is the size Quetzal measured. And while I am at it, during these deep-sea passages I also saw a creature about 10 meters tall with a giant mouth. The creature resembled a basking shark and also measured around 12 meters, as Quetzal said. He explained that it was a creature that had been considered extinct among Earthlings for millions of years, but that was not true, as I could see for myself. Yesterday I talked about it in the kitchen, but I could not remember what Quetzal called this sea creature. Do you perhaps remember because we talked about it once years ago after the deep-sea journeys?
Also, such giant octopods, as you call them, are sometimes washed up as carcasses from the oceans. But so far, only slightly smaller ones have been found, about 8–10 meters in size, but these have nothing to do with the dead creatures that are called globsters as carcasses. And what you are asking about the basking shark, which is what it really is this. Earth humans have already found teeth of giant sharks that are more than 3 times the size of the normal great white shark, and which are identical in every detail to the teeth of the normal great white shark. These teeth are not yet fossilized, or fossilized enough to belong to a fish that is said to have been extinct for a few 100,000 or millions of years. Unfortunately, information about such things is not made public enough or at all, so the public remains ignorant. The basking shark is the largest predator that has been hunting for prey in the oceans of the earth for millions of years, also today. This basking shark is called Megalodon, more precisely, Carcharocles megalodon, respectively big-tooth shark. The megalodon can be up to 25 meters in size, so it is not extinct. It is only submerged in the not-too-deep oceans. So it is not extinct either millions of years ago, nor 100,000 or even less years ago, as some scientists estimate today.
These giants do indeed still exist, as I have seen with my own eyes, so the basking shark cannot be extinct. Scientists are too quick to make claims that are not true, and then they have to revise them. This was also the case with the coelacanth, which scientists claim to have been extinct for a long time. As Quetzal said, it is said to grow to 2.5 meters, although specimens caught by Earthlings were about 1 meter smaller. I have also seen giant squid on deep sea dives, and some of these have also been washed up from the oceans in recent years. They were also a little smaller than the large lump I saw, which Quetzal said had a body of 2.20 meters and a total length of 23 meters with its 10 arms. But at least large carcasses were washed ashore, proving that there are still many very large sea creatures in the depths of the world's oceans, of which our scientists have no idea, but which seafarers have reported on since time immemorial, although this was always dismissed as sailors' yarn.
That is known to me.
What further interests me is where the real origin of the bubonic plague lay, which raged in Europe from 1347 to 1353, and later also in Africa and other countries, claiming many millions of human lives. It has been and is much talked about and argued about, but there have been and are only answers to this question that are not certain.
The origin of the bubonic plague was in Egypt on the one hand and China on the other. From Egypt, the pathogens of the disease were brought to Europe by rats and fleas, which were unwillingly carried along in trade goods, both via the Mediterranean and overland. The disease was also spread from China to Europe via the Silk Road, the most important trade route at the time, with Venice and Genoa also playing a major role. But the disease was also brought to Europe through the fault of members of a former Mongolian tribe, which had formed from Genghis Khan's army and became known as the Tartars. And about 100 years after the outbreak of the plague in Europe, the disease was also brought to Africa by a Chinese expedition, and in the 19th century from Hong Kong to the United States, India, and South America.
It is not known to me that the Tartars were in Central Europe, where the plague raged, so I do not understand how the disease could have been brought to Europe by the Tartar hordes.
They besieged the town of Kaffa in 1347.
Kaffa. Is this the old town of Kaffa in Crimea in the Ukraine, which was a trading base of the Genoese traders in the Middle Ages?
Yes. This city was besieged in 1347 by the Tartars, in whose ranks the plague had broken out. The dead who died from the plague were hurled over the high walls into the city with catapults, whereupon the plague also spread quickly. Those human beings who were able to do so fled the besieged city and remained unmolested by the besiegers, who did not want to come into contact with the fugitives because they thought they were infected by the plague. So the refugees reached the sea unhindered and fled by ship to Italy and Sicily, from where the plague could also spread and reach Central Europe. A number of circumstances must therefore be taken into account in relation to the outbreak of bubonic plague in Europe.
A rather inhumane way of dealing with the flinging of plague deaths into the city.
This was a common practice at the time to hurl contaminated dead human beings and animal carcasses into besieged towns and villages and settlements so that epidemics could break out. As a result, the plague also spread very quickly to Kaffa through such action.
So the plague servants not only had to defend themselves against the besiegers to the outside world, but they also had to collect the plague dead in the town every day, load them onto a cart, and bury them in a free place in the town in the so-called plague pits.
This is how it really was.
Then again, something about a plague. Recently, rabies, of which there are two types, is said to be approaching from eastern countries, which is little or not at all known to the population. There is the so-called aggressive rabies, in which animals, unfortunately sometimes humans as well, are extremely aggressive, scratching and biting around, whereby the disease is dangerously transmitted to other animals, but also to humans, if they have the bad luck to be attacked by rabid animals. Apart from this form of rabies, there is also the so-called silent rabies, which is perhaps even more dangerous than the aggressive form. This is because animals affected by this type of rabies, such as dogs, cats, and other critters that live or roam as pets, become lamb-like, flattering and cuddly, licking people's hands or face, etc., which infects them with rabies.
This is indeed the case, but it does not tell you what you want to ask.
Oh yes, my question is, to what extent can the disease be transmitted to the human being, respectively in what ways does the infection occur?
Rabies is an epidemic that is transmitted to the human being mainly by scratching and biting wounds as well as by the saliva of infected animals. Consequently, the eyes, mouth, and nose are also factors that absorb the rabies virus. If the human beings, for example, animals infected with rabies are licked on the body, hands, or face, or if the hands touch such places and these are then brought to the eyes, nose, or mouth, then infection inevitably occurs. And if there is a contamination, then there is practically always a fatal outcome. In certain cases, early vaccinations and appropriate injections and other measures can prevent the worst from happening. But this is always a highly questionable matter, because once the rabies virus is in the blood, there is usually no cure, either in the human being or in the animal. This very resistant virus can infect practically all mammals, which, once infected, can also transmit it to the human being.
After all, in Europe it is mainly foxes and bats that are infected and spread rabies in the wild. In tropical and subtropical countries, however, it is much more the stray dogs, but also the vampire bloodsuckers, which are also bats, such as the critters in South America and Panama, which feed on the blood of large herds of cattle. In India, which is actually the worst country in terms of rabies, I gained some experience when I worked for the animal welfare organization as a medicine man.
I know that, and what you say is correct.
Then my next question, which does not apply to the future, with those of whom you of course do not want to have contact. But my question does apply to the unknown to you, respectively, to the unknown to you Earth foreigners, of whom we have spoken about in our last conversation. I have indeed no contact with them, and also do not want to get in touch with them. Yet I think that you nevertheless know something about them, for I can myself imagine that you do not put aside the matter without observation and thought.
That is correct. Yet we do not concern ourselves too much with it, for the technology on which they operate, as well as their conduct, does not correspond to prerequisites, which would be important in accordance with our directives, which would allow us to enter into contact with them. From their technology and their behavior alone, we can infer their state of consciousness, which does not correspond to one that would allow us to contact them.
Their technology must, however, still be well developed, for they are able to come from somewhere in space to the Earth. And with their conduct.
Admittedly, this is actually so, yet the aliens are, regarding their consciousness development and their fallible conduct patterns, contrary to the inviolableness and the dignity of all life in exactly the same way, still are not sufficiently developed enough, as also not their technology. As a result, we are not able to arrange them in accordance with our directives into the important security stages, which are predetermined by us as our directives. And regarding their conduct, many matters do not correspond to a consciousness development, which would allow a contact starting and association with them in accordance with our directives. There were and are many incidents caused by them, which are not able to be reconciled with a healthy and higher consciousness ability development, as well as also not with various creational natural predetermined laws and regulations. Despite the higher developed technology, through which they are able to cope with travel through space, they are on this matter not much further developed than terrestrial scientific field-skilled workers, who, as a rule, all live just according to Earth human laws and regulations. While at the same time, they, however, still follow little, or in general nothing, in the exercising of the creational natural predetermined laws and regulations. Thus also the integrity of the body as well as the psyche of humans, animals and creatures, which is given by these laws and regulations, is not considered by them, just as it is also the case with the Earth humans.
And is this the case with all three groups unknown to you?
Yes, with these three groups is, however, to understand here that it concerns a matter about them of three different factions, who, however, all together build a unity, thus belonging together and in accordance with our observations of only one origin, however, who have different areas of responsibility on the Earth. Of three groups is only generally to speak, because our realizations of these Earth foreigners is that they are clearly organized for certain tasks in three different terrestrial areas, in which they become evident and are variously working. So one group moves entirely in the west continental area of Antarctica over Tierra del Fuego and all Americas, with various islands up to Alaska and to the Arctic. Then another group moves in entirely Europe with Africa and all islands, with Greenland, Eurasia, Arabia, Madagascar and the Arctic, as well as various islands. And finally, the third group moves entirely in Asia and Oceania with all islands, as also in Australia, Tasmania, New Zealand, and in a part of Antarctica.
Thus also here once again a misunderstanding, for we always thought that with the three groups may have meant three different Earth alien races, which would come from different worlds.
That was actually a misunderstanding, hence it is good that you have again brought up this matter.
And were you able to find out where these Earth foreigners come from, respectively, where their origin is?
Regarding the discovering of their origin planet, we have ourselves tried, yet I cannot give any information about it. Because up till now we do not know of this, and also on account of the lack of their consciousness and technological development, do not want to enter into association with them in order to find out. There must arise regarding this an unwanted foreordination, which, however, is doubtful, because we ourselves in no way seek a contact with them, as I already explained. Hence, we also do not watch their exact activities, but only take notice of them, which arises through unintentional observations, etc. And as far as the number of Earth foreigners is concerned, such were we able up to now only to observe a few of them, although all of these, however, were clearly registered by us.
However, you still would be able to follow the chaps secretly in order to find their homeworld if they would currently leave the Earth.
Up to now, we were not able to register any excursions by them from Earth space. As a result, we presume that they are permanently stationed here.
Then I will not ask any further questions about this. Then my next question, which again refers to apples, whose substances can prevent, reduce, or even dissolve cancer. Can this be generally understood in this way? Or are there certain factors to be taken into account where the cancer-inhibiting substances do not have any effect?
Yes, this is indeed the case, because if, for example, there is a genetic predisposition, then an effect is just as questionable as if a cancer disease is triggered by toxins and any foreign substances.
You mean foreign substances such as asbestos, for example, as well as poisons contained in food and in the air we breathe, or...
That is the meaning of what is said.
Then I have for this time no further questions.
For my part, however, I have something to say in a private way, something that will surely please you. Through observation, I have learned that.
This really pleases me. Thanks for the information. But can I ask you some more questions?
Of course, but after that I have to go.